Welcome back, everybody, to another lecture. Today, the topic at hand is the psychology of personality. It's a pretty important topic in psychology, and you probably think that just by the title of this lecture and the title of our content that this would be really, really interesting. But the chapter and the study of personality historically is focused upon the theories of personality. And I don't know about you, but whenever I hear the word theories, my eyes glaze over. But these are the dominant explanations in psychology over the last 120, 130 years as to how it is we become the personalities that we become. So as always, let's begin with some definitions. And so if you ask the question, what is personality? Personality is one of those words that you and I pretty much know what we mean when we use it, but defining it becomes a little slippery, kind of like trying to nail tofu to the wall. I guess you could do it, but it's going to be a mess. But here's our definition. Personality is an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. In other words, if you took any individual and you followed and observed them every day, they would come up with some consistent ways of thinking, or at least generally consistent, feeling and acting. Now, the understanding of personality clearly is a big topic, and there's an entire class at our college in personality, and so perhaps you've taken that or will take it. But today I want to focus really on the four main approaches or perspectives, and we'll spend most of the time talking about the psychoanalytic perspective since it was the first and in some ways has been extremely influential. But there's the psychoanalytic perspective, which is Freud and his followers, trait theory, the humanistic approach, and the social cognitive theory. Just some general observations. There's not many people around that really seriously buy the psychoanalytic approach in hook, line, and sinker these days. But it's still important actually to talk about it because everybody that came after Freud, including the various other people in the psychoanalytic tradition, really had to grapple with the definitions that Freud yeah, that's not Pink Floyd, it's Pink Freud, laid down. These days, trait theory is probably the dominant approach, and we'll talk briefly about that. And I would also say the social cognitive approach. Humanism has been extremely influential, at least in a popular way, of understanding not only personality. Humanism asks questions about self-concept and self-esteem and who am I. It's a very American way of seeing the human individual. But the humanistic perspective has been extremely influential when we're talking about therapy and counseling. And so we'll certainly get to that when we talk about the therapy chapter. So these are the four perspectives I want to just kind of go through briefly today. The psychoanalytic perspective is, again, is the theory or approach that came out of Sigmund Freud's understanding. Sigmund Freud, clearly all of us have heard his name again and again. He is one of those dominating characters in particularly modern Western intellectual history. Arguably, Karl Marx, Charles Darwin, and Sigmund Freud are the big, hugely influential intellectuals from the 19th and early 20th century that it's really hard to understate the three of these individuals' influence on Western thought. And so whether Marx, Darwin, and Freud were right, or as I believe, mostly wrong with some right kind of observations, it goes without saying that they were dominating characters. It's hard to simplify Freud's theory, but plenty of people have said that Freud's theory in some way made two assertions which were central to why and how we are the way we are as human beings. The first would be this understanding and idea of children as sexual beings. Now, just when I say that, you can understand at least a little bit why Freud's theory, at least in many circles, was controversial. When Freud began his theory, in some ways the European understanding, or the European zeitgeist, which is a German word meaning spirit of the age, was still in the Victorian kind of, named after Queen Victoria, but the Victorian kind of era. And so along comes this guy in Vienna who's talking about children and sex, and it goes to say that he ruffled a lot of feathers. And in fairness to Freud, we're gonna unpack that a little bit, and I don't think he's so wrong. But anyway, let's leave that for a second here. The second idea would be that as human beings, we are primarily motivated unconsciously. I think most of us would agree that there are parts of our personalities or ourselves which we are, at least at times, for better or for worse, unaware of. And Freud's theory really takes this idea of most of our personalities being hidden from our conscious selves and ran with it. And so if you can just grasp those two ideas just generally, you have a kind of a macro view of Freud's perspective. We should start with Freud's idea of what he called the psyche. Usually this is depicted in a kind of iceberg metaphor, because just like an iceberg, there would be a little bit of the iceberg sticking up over the water, but most of it would be under the water. So just FYI, if you're ever in charge of steering a ship and you see an iceberg, give it a wide berth. Freud said that as human beings, we have three aspects to our personality, or our psyche. Again, you may recall that Greek word psyche, meaning mind or soul or spirit, that which makes us us. And these three are the id, which we are born with, and it is completely unconscious. It is completely at the level of the unconscious. The ego, which we develop about 6 months of age, that is, half conscious and half unconscious. And then the superego, or in German, the Über-Ich, not Uber as in someone picking you up and giving you a ride somewhere, but Uber as in big or super or overarching, the over-I or the big I. And as you can see here, the id is the basic impulses, the animal part of us, and it's completely in the unconscious, and it dominates our personalities according to Freud. The ego is the mediator between reality and the superego and id, and then the superego, which we develop. This is the internalized moral strictures and rules we learn from our the society we grew up in, and of course, when we're little kids, the main influence of that society would be our parent or parents. So Freud simply said that these three structures of the mind are really the basic definition of why we are the way we are. So let's just talk a little bit more about each of these. The id, according to Freud, is defined as psychic or psychological energy that shows up as biological drives. We are born ids, according to Freud. I guess all of us are little idiots. We are 100% id up until the 6th or 7th month of our life. And we have two primary drives of the id, and they're named after two Greek gods, goddesses. Eros, you can see in the image in front of you, that's Eros, and then Thanatos, which is behind. And sometimes when we hear about Freud's theory, we think sex and aggression. Freud's kind of a negative character, and tends to focus on the dark side of humans. And you know what? You would be exactly right. Freud was extremely pessimistic about human beings. Freud said because we have an id, and when you think of sex and aggression, we have to disconnect our mind a little bit from our understanding of sex and aggression of human beings. Think of sex and aggression for Freud, and think of the id as an animal. So if you were watching some animal show on the Discovery Channel and you were watching lions, well, what do lions do on those? They have to kill. They have to kill. Why? To eat, to survive. So we don't look at lions, on a show and go, oh, those are really bad lions. Those are immoral lions. Those are evil lions. No, it's the nature of a lion, if they want to stay alive, to engage in aggression, namely to kill their food. They don't have A&P, they don't have ShopRite, they don't have Kings to go and have someone do their killing for them. In addition, how do animals procreate? How do animals continue? Well, a fair amount of animal shows will depict animals going through the process of mating. And again, that's not just the actual act of mating or sex itself, but in a lot of animal species, the males fight, and or in some bird species, the male has to perform a beautiful presentation or dance before the female chooses them. So think of sex and aggression in this particular case, as Freud did, as life. That would be the sex part. All life begins, at least in most animals, certainly all mammals, with mating or sexual activity, and then death, which would be the aggression part. Sometimes when I talk to some people and they talk about nature, and they have this view of nature as, flitting butterflies and sunshine and beautiful flowers, and isn't nature a beautiful thing? But when you really study nature, it is one long, crazy cycle of survival and death, and animals are born and they die. Some pretty quickly, some survive, but sooner or later that circle of life takes all animals, all of us as human beings. So for Freud, really the id is born with this drive to stay alive and this drive to kill. And that's really a better way to understand Eros and Thanatos than some kind of sex and aggression, and this is just the dark side of humans, and so on and so forth. But Freud said because the id is the most powerful part of the psyche, he is not surprised at all when you open up the newspaper and see killing and mayhem and selfishness and evil. Freud just thought that was the default setting of human beings. If you have an animal nature in you, and again, Freud saw that animal nature as a function of evolution. But however you see it, if there's this part of us that is not socialized, that has to be tamed, so to speak, quote unquote, like any animal would be tamed to not kill you, and and just like a wild animal, if you got a baby, lion and raised it as an animal, well, you may think you have it tamed, but the wild nature is still in that animal, and that, in Freud's view, is how we should understand our ids. Our ids are the wild nature inside of us, and the ego and the superego can tame, so to speak, the id somewhat, but it retains its danger. It retains its animalistic nature. Now, the id, I thought that was funny. I looked up on Google Images for id, and this is what came up. So this is your id card. But the id has one rule and one rule only. It doesn't care what people think. It doesn't care what's right and wrong. The id is simply subscribes to one commandment, and Freud called it the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle is simply this. Your id prefers to do things that are pleasurable, that are easy, that are enjoyable, and avoid doing things that are hard, that are work. This is why most of us, if you're like me, I would rather, sit around and watch Netflix or read a novel or, go for a hike than do work and, engage in the necessary activities, doing my banking and, calling my friend to have a difficult discussion. One of the reasons why we procrastinate. Do you procrastinate at all? I think it's probably the biggest obstacle of being a successful college student is to avoid procrastination. But what is procrastination? Putting off the hard stuff and doing the easy stuff. So that's what the pleasure principle is. And Freud said and again, think of a 3-month-old baby. 3-month-old babies are not all about, okay, I got to get up, I got to do this. They're all about, hey, I'm hungry, feed me. Hey, I'm wet, change my diaper. Hey, I'm mad, I'm going to cry. Hey, they are all about immediate gratification, particularly of a pleasure kind, and will scream and weep and wail and gnash their teeth, and if they're not happy. So the pleasure principle has two aspects. Reflex action is just the Nike way of coming at these things. Just do it. Just do it. So you're hungry, just eat. You're angry, scream. You are lazy, sit around. It's just follow whatever internal impulse you have. It's a reflex action. Now, the baby quickly learns, according to Freud, that reflex actions don't always work, right? There's blowback, there's consequences. And so Freud said the id, all of our ids develop a second way to, if you will, satisfy eros and thanatos, and it is what he called primary process thinking. To put that into a term that you and I use, imagination. So someone makes me very, very angry, and instead of just lashing out at them and hitting them, which may include the consequences of me getting fired, me getting arrested, all kinds of bad things. No, I'm going to say, this person made me angry. I can't do anything, so let me just go back and sit down, at my desk and imagine this person that made me angry, something bad happening to them. Imagine pushing them off a cliff or whatever it is. So the id initially uses reflex action, but eventually uses primary process thinking. Now that's a basic introduction to the id. The ego, and again, the problem here with the idea of ego is that the way most of us use the term ego is not the way Freud used it. So if I say, hey, our president has a big ego, that would be the Donald. Well, most of us would understand that to be a person with a big ego has a very, very high opinion of themselves, and their attitude is, hey, let the party begin. I have arrived. They're arrogant, have an inflated sense of themselves. That's not the way Freud uses ego. Ego, when translated from German, would just be the I, not I as in what you look out of the world at, but I as in capital I. I am Stephen. I go home. I am a man. So ego would be the part of you which is the aware part of yourself. This is if I said to you, hey, who are you? You said, well, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other thing. That's your ego. Now, it's the executive part of your personality. We tend to think of executives as powerful. No, ego is weak as can be. The ego is like a 90-pound weakling with very small guns and weak as can be. It's executive in the sense that the ego is the mediator, the kind of United Nations of our personality between the id, which is powerful, the superego, which has its own power, and then reality. Hey, you and I, Freud said, have to live in a real world with real rules and real consequences and helpful people and non-helpful people, and we got to eat and pay our rent and so on and so forth. So we develop an ego, according to Freud, at about 6 months of age, as a mediator initially to negotiate between the id, which wants Now think of a baby. A baby wants to do what it wants to do. But reality in the shape of my parents, most parents are pretty okay with their little babies doing whatever they want. But after a while, parents begin making demands. No, you can't eat at 3:30 in the morning. No, you need to learn to sleep through the night. No, we'll allow you to be in diapers for a while. But no, sooner or later, you need to learn how to go to the bathroom. No, you are not allowed to pitch a fit when we are in McDonald's. You need to start controlling yourself, or there's consequences. So initially, the ego, again, just serves as a mediator. Now, the ego pretty much has one rule as well, not the pleasure principle, but the reality principle. The reality principle is simply this. What are the consequences if I allow the id to do what it wants, or the superego? In other words, the ego tends to look at any situation and say, okay, what are the chances of us getting caught here? And if we do get caught, what exactly are the consequences that are going to, and is it worth it? So let's say the 5-year-old kid, wants to eat some cookies, and their parents say no. Okay, now the id wants the cookies. Let's just eat cookies, man. What's better than cookies? Reality in the shape of my parent has said no. So what's the ego going to do? The ego is going to say, okay, is there a way that we could get the cookies but not let reality know about it? In other words, according to Freud, this is the beginning of deceit. Deceit is a way that the ego allows the id to do what it wants. I'll sneak in the kitchen when my parents are in the bathroom, and I'll open up the cookie container. Instead of taking the ones at the front, I'll take the ones at the back, so that if my mom or dad looks, it looks like there are no cookies gone. Then I'll quickly go out of the kitchen, hide the cookies. Then when my parent comes out of the bathroom, pretend I was just sitting there, staring out the window. Then when my parents are preoccupied, let me go find those cookies and eat them slowly. Hey, jackpot. Reality principle solved. The cookies are eaten. The id is happy. Reality is happy because reality thinks, hey, my kid obeyed me. That's the ego. It's not concerned about what's right, what's wrong. It's just, what is the blowback? What are the consequences? Clearly, ego is pretty important for us. Superego, again, das Über-Ich, according to Freud, the over-I or the super-I. This is the moral part of us. This is the internalized moral structure of our society around us. So all of us grow up in a context of family here or family there, or someone's taking care of us. Maybe it was an orphanage. In my case, it was mostly boarding schools. But there are rules. There are regulations. We quickly figure out, hey, you're not supposed to do that. Hey, you're allowed to do that. Hey, you're not supposed to do that with this person. Hey, you're allowed to do, I'm allowed to hit my brother because he's smaller than me, but I can't hit my dad because he's bigger than me. And so we quickly learn, most kids are pretty adept at avoiding negative consequences, and so we internalize these standards. That becomes our superego. It becomes the foundation for making judgments about right, wrong, good, bad, so on. And it has two parts. Superego has two parts. One is the ego ideal, and don't get that mixed up with the ego. The ego ideal that represents the things I should do. I should be thoughtful, and I should say my prayers, and I should do my homework, and I should be polite to grandma. And the ego ideal, according to Freud, we get the ego ideal on the basis of what we're rewarded for, praised for. So, when I'm polite to my grandma, when she gives me something and I say, thank you, grandma, and what do my parents do? That was really good. That was so good how you said thank you to grandma. Man, you were an awesome kid. The conscience, on the other hand, represents those things I shouldn't do, according to Freud. I shouldn't be rude, and I shouldn't steal, and I shouldn't lie, and I shouldn't, say nasty words to the kid down the street. And again, the conscience, according to Freud, we internalize that as children on the basis of what we're punished for. So if you think about this, Freud said that the conscience part of our superego will be big if your parents or whoever raised you pretty much used punishment. You will have a big your superego will be all about, I'm going to get punished, I'm going to get punished, I'm going to get punished. If whoever raised you primarily tried to raise you by encouraging you to do the right thing and then rewarding, then you won't have a big punishment aspect of your superego. You'll have a big, I'm a good boy, I did the right thing, part. Freud thought that the superego was extremely important. It's easy to get these stereotypes about people. Where Freud, was all down on guilt, and Freud, no, Freud said you will be kind of an animal. You will be kind of just an operator if you don't have these internalized moral standards. You need this North Star, if you will. You need a moral guiding set of principles. And Freud said we get that through the superego. I like this part of Freud's theory because I think there's some really good applicable takeaway information here. Now, Freud said we develop we're born ids, develop ego 6 months of age, superego about 5 to 6 years of age. And that's not all he said. Freud said that all human beings go through a series of 5 stages. And let's just talk about these pretty quickly. The first stage is the oral stage. This is the first year of life. And the oral stage, and by the way, why these stages? Why do we have oral, anal, phallic? Why don't we have ear stage and nose stage and, big toe stage? Freud said that at certain points in our developmental process from infancy to adolescence, the id impulses, eros and thanatos, specialize. They focus on certain parts of the body. And so think of a newborn baby, the first year of life. Pretty much what is a baby all about behaviorally? Their mouth. They have to, eat with their mouth, sucking on their mom's breast. They're crying, they're communicating. Everything's about the mouth. You hand, a set of keys to a little kid, what do? Right away, jam it in their mouth. So the focus it impulses focuses on the mouth. And then during the anal stage, which always struck me as a little random, but the anal stage for Freud, this is all about the toilet training process, right? It's all about, and again, it's easy for you and I, those of you that are parents, to be somewhat all easygoing about the anal stage because we have diapers and we're not actually washing out diapers by hand. In Freud's day and age, toilet training was a big deal. And it was a little crazy the way they set about doing that. But again, eros and thanatos tend to focus on the anal stage. The third of these stages for Freud is probably the most important, and that was the phallic stage. You're going to read about this, but the phallic stage included these 2 aspects, the Oedipal and the Electra conflict. Now, Oedipal is what boys go through, and the Electra is what girls go through. Up until this stage, both boys and girls have a mouth. Both boys and girls have an anus, and the experience of boys and girls, according to Freud, was exactly the same. When we hit the phallic stage, and phallus is another word for penis, the male genital, you may think to yourself, well, why is this called the phallic stage? Because Freud was a sexist. Well, Freud was a sexist, but this stage, and this is where Freud gets a little weird, this stage is all about having a penis or not. So the Oedipal conflict, according to Freud, is that boys do have a penis, and they attach eros to their mother. They want to have sex with their mother. Okay, this is Freud's theory, not mine. So just remember he used cocaine for like 20 years, so maybe the theory makes sense on the basis of that. Okay, anyway, sorry. I'm off the topic. So the boy wants to have sex with his mother, and he attaches thanatos to his father. Well, I want to get rid of my father. He's the competition for sexual possession of my mother. And the boy thinks to himself, okay, that's a good plan. Kill dad, have sex with mom. Now, the problem with this theory, number one, is that thankfully most parents are not going to go for this, okay? And the boy thinks to himself, man, my dad is big. If he ever finds out that I want to kill him and steal mom away from him, he's going to cut off my penis, my phallus. And so the boy has what Freud called castration anxiety, anxiety about their father catching them in their plan and cutting off their penis. Now, what happens is, for most cases, according to Freud, the boy eventually gives up this plan because the mothers are not going to have sex with their sons in the great majority of cases, again, thank God. So the boy thinks to himself, okay, let me give up this plan. Let me instead try to be like my dad. Boys, according to Freud, 4 to 5 years age, their dads are their heroes. So the boy thinks, if I could be like dad, I could just be like my dad. Someday I will be able to attract a woman just like my mom. And according to Freud, that would be a successful resolution of the Oedipal conflict. Girls, according to Freud, and by the way, this is all taking place unconsciously, remember, this is all in the id impulses. Girls recognize at some point, because remember when Freud is writing, families were big, and girls saw their brothers running around because they noticed, hey, I don't have one of those things, my brothers do, one of those penises. Now the girl initially thinks, well, I'm probably going to grow one, but it dawns on her, I'm not getting one of those. She attaches Thanatos to her mother. Mom, she's angry, very angry with her mother. Why did you bring me into the world incomplete and without a penis? Again, not my theory, okay? She wants one. She has, according to Freud, something called penis envy. She wants a penis. Her brothers have one. She thinks to herself, who has one? My dad. So she wants to have sex with her father because in the act of sexual intercourse, at least temporarily, there is the possession of a penis. Now again, in the same way with boys, the Electra conflict eventually, in most cases, is resolved in this way. The girl gives up wanting to have sex with her father because fathers, in most cases, are not going to go along with this plan. Instead, they identify with their mother. They want to be like their mom. And it's not just because their mom was able to attract a man. No, it's their mom was able to attract a man who she had sex with, which impregnated her, and she gave birth to boys. Men want a woman like their mom. So if you're a woman out there and you're dating a man and he mistakenly calls you mom, don't be creeped out by that, according to Freud. It's the highest compliment. Women don't necessarily want a man like their dad, according to Freud. No, they want a man that will give them sons. Okay. This whole theory is, in my view, completely psychotic and nuts. Okay, so, but it's Freud's theory. Latency stage is, according to Freud, I guess this is a period of 5-6 years where id impulses just take a break. I don't know. They're latent. And then finally, the 5th stage, the genital stage, is just really phallic stage part 2. And so Freud said if boys identify with their father and girls identify with their mother, and there's a healthy resolution of the Oedipal and Electra conflicts, then once we hit the puberty and the teenage years, boys and girls will be heterosexual. Boys will be attracted to women, and girls will be attracted to men. If the Oedipal and Electra conflicts, according to Freud, are not successfully resolved, then it was Freud's opinion that in the genital stage, gay and lesbian people, and Freud's view, his explanation, was that they were simply people who were fixated in some kind of way at the non-resolution of the Electra and Oedipal conflicts. Now you might say, is there any evidence for this? No. There's no evidence for anything, Freud said. And his explanation, his so-called explanation of homosexuality, like so many others, whether it's right or wrong, and I happen to think it's completely wrong, there's no evidence. If I could just add as an aside, in Freud's day and age, it was very, very rare that children didn't live in a home with a father and a mother. Divorce was almost none. It just almost never happened. And of course, moms and dads died, but 120 years ago, people tended to marry pretty quickly. Widows and widowers, they would find somebody to marry. Think of, if Freud's theory was right, and think of the more than 50% of, for instance, American kids will at least spend part of their childhood living with one parent in a single parent household. Well, given Freud's understanding of things, and he would have said, you would expect way, way more homosexuals, because there, a mother or father wouldn't even be present, and there would be all kinds of problems. And that's not the case. The incidence of homosexuality tends to stick around 5%, no matter where you go in the world and no matter what else happens. So it seems at least somewhat independent, and I'll have to put somewhat, of these things going on, particularly with Freud's theory. Now, with Freud, since everything is about the unconscious, and I'm just going to go quickly over here. In Freud's understanding, if you went for therapy, the job of the therapist would be to do everything they possibly can to pull out of you information in the unconscious, because all of the big conflicts, all of the issues that are causing you anxiety or depression or whatever it is, according to Freud, they would have come from the id, or they would have been affected by the id, and so they would be in the unconscious. So Freud's therapy, and all of us have heard about, laying on a couch, and, Freud used hypnosis, but to use something called free association as well, in which basically Freud would have someone just lay down and relax and say the first thing that came to their mind. Or later on, this guy named Rotter, Julian Rotter, came up with a sentence completion test in which people would just finish a sentence, and they would do it as quickly as they can. So if you completed these questions quickly, I feel the first thing that comes to your mind, blurt it out. Because if you think about it, then Freud said that your ego is and superego are going to engage in a kind of repression, cleaning up. So the idea here is, whether you're just saying whatever, or you're finishing sentences, or you're responding to individual words, would be to somehow get some connection with the unconscious. Others example of these would be Freud's idea of dream interpretation. Freud was big that dreams always were not random, and every dream had two levels of interpretation. The manifest meaning, which is just kind of the more obvious one, like you don't need to pay some high, expensive psychoanalyst money to interpret that. It would just be like, if you're anxious about school, you may have a dream about, trying to find a test, or the classroom you're taking the test, and, stuff keeps coming up and you can't find the classroom and you're going to fail. The latent meaning, on the other hand, according to Freud, was the deep, hidden meaning. And, obviously, it usually related to sex or aggression or something like that. And so dreams, according to Freud, are the unconscious mind kind of expressing itself through dreams in a kind of hidden way. Projective tests like the Rorschach, these would simply be, like if I showed you a bunch of ink blots and you looked at them, and I say, what do you see? Well, people see different things, and the idea is we're all looking at the same thing. Why do I see, looking at this, some kind of big giant, and you see a bearskin rug, and someone else sees, a stain on the floor. What we see is what we're projecting onto the image. And for Freud, that projection, that what we see is my unconscious kind of seeing something. And again, you may say, so what? Well, then it's the job of the psychoanalyst to interpret. If I saw a stain, I just spilled a bunch of, like some coffee on the floor, and, what does that mean? And again, in the Freudian technique, usually something having to do with sex and aggression, my soul is stained because of this or that. I mean, sorry, I'm a little cynical about all this. So, forgive me. Let me get professional again. Okay. So that would be really, really important for Freud's approach. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the therapy. Let's talk about trait theory. The trait theory is the second overall, and I'm going to go through these last three pretty quickly. Trait theory would answer the question, why are we the way we are, by simply saying, a la Lady Gaga, we're born that way. No, not completely. That what a trait is this kind of characteristic way of behaving, thinking, feeling. It's if someone said your name to someone else, and they're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, I know that person. They're always that way. They're always kind, or they're always a little bit of a pain in the neck, and so on and so forth. So it's this disposition. Genetics would be the underlying foundation of our traits. So trait theory would simply say, yeah, there's a good reason why you're like your mom or your dad, or even your grandparents. Now, you're not exactly like them because you grew up in a different day and age, and you were influenced by, YouTube, where your grandparents wouldn't even understand what YouTube is all about, and so on and so forth. But traits are these things, these predispositions to respond, which are shaped by our environment, but nonetheless are consistent enough. And there's been a bunch of different trait theories. The big trait theory now, and the one I think it's the best personality theory of all, is called the Big Five. And the Big Five basically has said that there are at least 5. And again, other trait theories have said there are 6 or there are 7, but there are at least 5 theories, traits that you and I differ on, but seem to be consistent to every person at every time, in every age, in every place. And they are, starting from the top, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so the Big Five here, if we could just go, so let's just take emotional stability. So it would simply be this. You and I, all of us, we range on a continuum on emotional stability from not stable to really, really stable. Okay? Now, there's all kinds of ways in which this stability, emotional stability or instability, shows up in terms of our personalities and behavior and thought. So, for instance, are you a calm person versus an anxious person? Are you generally secure about who you are, or are you insecure? Are you generally, okay with the way things are, or are you constantly like, poor me, woe is me? In terms of extroversion versus introversion, are you, sociable, or are you more introverted? Are you a fun-loving person versus, sober-minded and practical? Are you very affectionate versus kind of reserved? The openness, are you really open, or are you closed? Are you imaginative versus that's the craziest thing I ever heard. Let's just do this practical. Do you have a preference for all kinds of different things, or do you have a preference for, hey, I know what I like when I go into a restaurant, I'm going to order the same thing every time? Are you independent, or do you more likely to conform to the group? Agreeableness, are you just an easy person to get along with? You go along with the group, or you tend to need to have things your way? Are you generally trusting and giving people with the benefit of the doubt, or are you suspicious and like, okay, when you meet someone, you're like, okay, what does this person want from me? What's their deal? How do I protect myself from them? And then conscientious, are you really organized versus a slob? Are you really careful about your decisions versus just seize the day kind of thing, go with the flow? Are you impulsive versus very, very organized and disciplined? The point here is that the Big Five trait theory would say, and by the way, if you're interested in this, I would encourage you, and I wish I would have put the link in your thing here, but I would encourage you to go on Google and just type in Big Five trait theory personality test. There are some free, and there's ones you can take this, and it'll give you all kinds of reports. Now, why am I so positive on this? The Big Five theory has huge amounts of actual research data, actual evidence consistently on men, women, old, young, African American, Latino, Asian, Caucasian, American, French, Thai, Indian, old, young. It has huge amounts of research which show that there's actually evidence for this theory. And hey, I don't have to always be about the evidence. Clearly, I believe God exists, and you can't prove that. But I think it's best when we're studying anything to go with the approach in which there's way more evidence. The third perspective is the humanistic one. And again, it's hard to underestimate or underreport how important the humanistic perspective has been in terms of therapy. All of you have heard about Maslow's hierarchy. The humanists came along in the 1960s, and they rescued psychology from the behaviorists on the one hand, who spent a lot of time with rats and pigeons, and on the other hand, the Freudians again, who were crazy in their own way. I think you just heard me talk about that. And their idea was that psychology should really address the everyday human functioning of a regular person. And so what's important to you and I every day? Well, I don't know about you. It's the big questions. Am I loved? Am I cared for? Do I have meaning and purpose in my life? Why am I here? Am I successful? Am I a loser? Am I a failure? How do I see myself? Why do I keep doing these stupid things? The practical, mundane, and yet really important everyday questions of being a human being. And Maslow simply said that we have a lot of needs, and I need to eat. I need to not be constantly afraid of being stabbed to death when I step outside this building. I have needs of wanting to be loved and wanting to be included and valued, and I have needs, intellectual needs and spiritual needs, and so on and so forth. And Maslow simply said that we tend to meet our needs, or go about trying to meet our needs in this kind of pyramidal form. That if I wake up and I'm starving to death, or I have nothing to drink, you know what? I'm pretty much going to spend all my time, effort trying to get something to eat. Most of us don't want to die. And when my basic needs are met, then I want to remain safe, physically safe, psychologically safe, and then I want to ensure that I belong and I'm loved, and it's only then that I go about feeling like it's important for me to be accomplished and make a contribution, and so on and so forth. At the very top of this was what Maslow called peak experiences, and for those of you that are that are wondering what that is, Maslow certainly said that that would be certain religious experiences that people have. Again, peak experiences are those things that change you. Now, it doesn't have to be religious. Remember, this is the 60s. Maslow said it could be a drug experience. It could be standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon or on the top of Mount Fuji, like, whoa. It could be a near-death experience. It could be a sexual experience. It would just simply be something that I experience which reorients me, and which for the rest of my life is one of those things I look back on as giving me meaning. And so Maslow simply says we do want to, we seek meaning, we seek purpose, we want to contribute, we want to be all we can be, we want to be people, not just to go through life just, partying and having fun, and no, meaning is really the underlying purpose. And you can understand why this is so profound. Carl Rogers is the other very important humanist, and Rogers is very important for therapy, and he said that, all human beings, no matter what relationship you're in, whether it's a spousal relationship or a parental relationship or a relationship with a counselor or a therapist or a teacher, what we need as human beings is three things from others. And therefore we need to give other people three things. We need them to be real with us and genuine. We need them to accept us, what Rogers called unconditional positive regard. And we need a sense of empathy. We need people, when they hear us and listen to us and interact with us, to try and understand what it's like to be us. Now, it's hard to argue with genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. They're beautiful things. Rogers has been criticized that if you look at how actually human beings behave, this would be the ideal, but most of us don't get that. Now, we get it occasionally, and when we do get it, I don't know about you, but when I meet someone that I feel is real, they're not hypocrites, and they're not faking it, and they're not trying to manipulate me. They basically accept me, and they're able to get me with empathy. I don't know. It's so much easier to connect with that person. Rogers does focus, too, on self-concept and self-esteem. Again, your grandparents or your great-grandparents, all this self-esteem talk and, meaning and who am I and I got to be, they would say, what are you talking about? Get out there and start working. You don't have time to navel gaze. But I think most of us, it may be better or worse, we do spend time thinking, okay, who am I? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? What kind of person am I? How do I feel about myself? What do I want to change? How can I improve? This is part of who we are, and you can thank Rogers and the humanists for that. So the humanist perspective is all about a kind of singular attempt to understand ourselves, to gain meaning, to align who I am with who I want to be and work on that. And it's a very individualistic, dare I say, American approach. And I don't mean that negatively necessarily. It's all about the possibility of change and developing and reinventing myself and improvement and so on and so forth. Hang on there. We're at 50 minutes, but this one will be quick. The social cognitive perspective really says that the theory of how we became the people we are, there's no real theory. You're not talking about ids, egos, psyches, this, that, the other thing. No. Basically, the social cognitive perspective would say, hey, there are three big factors that influence personality development and in an ongoing way. In fact, we're never done. We have a personality today that may be a little different than the personality yesterday. So personality is really something that is just who we are at any given moment. And it's constantly changing and evolving and being influenced by, on the one hand, my environment. Is it day? Is it night? Is it hot? Is it cold? Am I here? Am I there? Our environments are constantly influencing us. On the other hand, my behavior. When I behave there, it changes my environment. If I act this way, my environment's going to be better. If I act that way, my environment's going to be worse. And finally, I have a whole internal world of attitudes and emotions and thoughts and those things, those three big things are constantly in a ongoing, mutually influencing pattern of evolvement. And so what is personality? It's what you are now on the basis of how those three things have influenced what you are now for the last, however long you've been living. So the social cognitive perspective would say we really need 7.5 billion theories of personality because every single one of us has a slightly different environment. Even identical twins, one is on the right, one is on the left, one was born first, one was born second, and so on and so forth. Identical twins don't behave exactly alike. Identical twins may think alike, but they're not identical. So in some ways, there is no theory of personality except to say you are the sum total of these three things as they've mutually influenced and affected each other. Okay, it's almost 33 minutes. Thank you for listening. Have a good day and on to the next lecture. Take care.